Well, I recently came across some modern art. I don't know how you feel about modern art. There tends to be a strong reaction one way or another. But I want to put some of those up on the screen for you. And what I want to do with this is because I think I'm not a modern art fanatic, but I thought they were interesting enough to put on the screen. I want to look at some of the things that we have. And if you think the painting on the left side or the art on the left side is worth more, then raise your hand. If you think it's on the right side, then leave your hand down. I want to do a little bit of test here. I want us to judge this art and see how we do with the actual answer. So let's look at this art that we have coming up here. So here we have two pieces of modern art. If you think this on the left side is worth more, I guess that would be, your left side is worth more, raise your hand. If you think the one on the right is worth more, then leave your hand down. Okay, very interesting. Yeah, so the one that is on this side over here, that is a Jackson Pollock piece, 1948, worth $151.2 million. So yes, the other one, I Googled food stain, and that was what popped up. We have a few more. Let's continue. Let's keep judging these paintings. Okay, we have these two. Raise your hand if you think it's the one on this side, on the left side. Okay, well, maybe we have some art majors in here. You would be right if you put your hand up because the one right there, that is titled Blackfire 1, and that is worth $84.2 million. And I look at that, and I can see the fire. I can see the black fire. The other one is a picture of the wall behind you. So if you had your hand down, this building is worth a lot of money, so you were probably pretty close. Let's look at this next one. We have some chalkboard art. Okay, let's see. Raise your hand if you think it is on this side, if you think that's the one that's worth more. Okay, maybe a few of you. Well, you'd be wrong. That is a screenshot from the movie Good Will Hunting. We were watching that the other day, and I said that would work. But no, this work is actually untitled, if you could imagine that. It is worth $70 million by C.Y. Twombly. Maybe some of your professors or teachers in the past could have made a lot of money, and they didn't realize it. Let's look at the next one. We still have a few more to go through. We have two different potatoes. One of them is probably a better looking quality. I don't know. Well, raise your hand if it's the left side. That one was a little bit easier. Yes, this potato is titled number 345, and it's worth $1 million. The other one is, you can find it at Kroger. That is a russet potato. And that is the image that they use at Kroger when you look at how much their potatoes cost. And so, fun fact, that's the potatoes used for McDonald's fries. So maybe to you, that one might be worth a little bit more. I know it is to me. Let's look at the next couple. All right, what are we thinking? Left side, who believes the one on the left is worth more? You all are sharp. Because the one on the left side, this right here, that is, if you go down our preschool hallway, I took a picture of the wall. And that's what it is. That got a lot of people first service. A lot of people thought that was worth more. Because this other one here, that one is worth a lot of money, $2.2 million. The translation for the name is painting the dog. Yeah, painting the, I don't see the dog in there at all. But it was worth a lot of money to some people, so let's look at the next couple here. And now this one, I want us to be careful because I think you can look at both of these, and both of these are probably worth a good amount of money. But remember, it's which one is worth more. So if you think the one on the left is worth more, raise your hand. Okay, and if you think the one on the right is worth more, then your hand should be down. Okay, I'm a little bit hurt because I think more people were voted for the left one. I drew the one on the right. And a lot of people did ask about that one, and I don't know what I did with it. I should have kept it because if it was as much as they thought the other one was, that one is here on the blue, also by Barnett Newman, the same guy who did Blackfire. That is $43.8 million sitting on the screen right there. I don't know if you would hang that up in your house, but we probably couldn't afford it if we tried. So last one, let's look at this last one. Okay. Maybe I threw a curveball in. Which one? If you think it's the left side, raise your hand. All of you guys are fools because that is a picture of, if you go to our kids' check-in, there's a rug that's right there. That is a picture of that rug. The balloon animal, it is a little bit blurry, but that is a 10-foot tall balloon animal, so not exactly fair, but it is $53.4 million. What I like about this is immediately as we've gone through this illustration, you might be judging a little bit. One, you're comparing the two, which one's worth more, but you're also judging isn't who would buy that? Like who would pay that much money for that art? And where do I find those people? And how can I sell to those people? There's a lot of judgment that goes on. When we hear that word judgment, it can be a scary word. We don't exactly, there are different definitions for it. I could be judging something. Judgment could be brought upon me. There are judges out there. This word is used in a lot of different ways. I want to turn to John chapter 8 because I would like to discuss how we see judgment in this passage. And I think it'll be interesting if you stick with me, but we're going to read through this story, so it could be helpful for it to be open in front of you. That way you can kind of go through it with me. So that is on page 730. But this is an exciting story. I'm going to go ahead and start, and then I'll give you some background. Verse 1 says this, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. If you're still flipping there, that was verses 1 and 2 sort of introducing this. I want to introduce it a little bit bigger because I think it's important to look at the full scale of what we're reading here. John chapter 7, towards the end of that chapter, we're learning a lot about who Jesus is. We're learning things like these Pharisees are arguing about who Jesus is, and so they are figuring out, and we're looking at this process. For the first time in John, we're seeing what this looks like. In fact, the Pharisees are there arguing, and two guards come up who they had instructed to go arrest Jesus. But when the guards get back, they say, once we heard him speak, we'd never heard anybody talk like that before, and we didn't arrest him. And the Pharisees are like, you fools, right? Like you've been tricked. He tricks people, and that's what he did with you. How could you be so foolish in that? But then even like Nicodemus speaks up, who is a Pharisee. And it's funny because if you know the story of Nicodemus, Jesus sits down with him, has a conversation because Nicodemus is interested to hear what Jesus has to say. And in this, Nicodemus comes up and he's like, well, guys, hold on. Like maybe we should hear this guy out and listen to what he has to say. And the Pharisees almost like dismiss him. They joke with him. They're like, are you from Galilee as well? Like, we are not listening to this guy. This is ridiculous. Don't be ridiculous. And so they have had this dispute. The Pharisees are kind of going at it with other people, discussing who Jesus really is. And then we get to this passage. But then if we were to skip past this passage, there's more of this. There's more disputing who Jesus is, except Jesus is involved in this conversation. And we see Jesus give a testimony. He is telling his story. He's telling who he is. And it's really interesting to me that one of the first times we see in the book of John that Jesus declare himself as God. He says, I am, and he declares himself to be God. In this whole conversation of identity that we're having of who is Jesus, what is this guy about, what does this look like, we get this story that seems out of place right here in the middle. And I would argue that this story must be pretty important to when we think of who Jesus is, to the identity of Christ. This is a very, very important story. It wasn't put here on accident. Well, let's keep looking to see what we uncover from this. Picking up in verse 3, it says, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in the act of adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. So we're setting the scene right now. This woman is brought out. Notice adultery is an act of two, but only one person gets brought out, and it's this woman. The only way that she is referred to is as woman caught in the act of adultery. That's got to be an unfortunate name to have as far as the Bible comes along. Now, this woman is brought out, and it tells us that a lot of times we have this picture of her kind of like slouched down and covered up. Maybe we don't see anything. But she is caught in the act of adultery. So it's very, very likely that she isn't really wearing anything. And if you see what the text says here, it tells her they tell her to stand. Now, if I've ever been in an uncomfortable setting, I won't voluntarily stand up. Like that's like if we are sitting around, like I'm at a new place, if there's couches around and I'm meeting a new group of friends about people that I don't know very well, I'm probably not going to stand up in front of these people. I'll probably kind of stay seated, maybe lean against the wall. A lot of people when they're uncomfortable, maybe you can relate, pull out their phone, do things to kind of blend in. Well, this woman is brought and told to stand before this group of religious officials. So already an intimidating crowd. Like I said, she's not in the most presentable manner. You can imagine the shame and the loneliness that she feels. But let's continue. Verse 5, it says, "In the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. So they're using this as a trap. The Pharisees do this a lot. They're talking to Jesus, and they want to trap him. They want to back him into a corner. And so the way they're doing this is, the law of Moses does say if you're caught in the act of adultery, the result is you should be stoned. So if Jesus can't disagree with that, because then he would be disagreeing with the law, and that would be a bad thing to do. But also, if he goes the other way and does the other option, if he just kind of lets it slide and shows mercy, then it's a weird thing, because then he's disagreeing with the law of Moses. But if he doesn't do that, then he's kind of going back on what he's said and taught this whole time. So they think they have him in a corner. If he goes this way, he's wrong. If he goes this way, he is wrong. But as we look at this is not what he does. He continues, and Jesus is, he is stone cold. He is cool, calm, collected. Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin throw a stone at her." Now, this is not uncommon for teachers to be writing in the ground. He's not crazy. This is something that would actually happen pretty frequently. There's no chalkboards at this time, so when we think of old teachers, even old philosophers, making a point would be easier if it was written down somewhere. So they would do this in the sand. Picture it like a professor. You walk in and you're having an argument with him, and he's making a point by writing it on the board, and so that's what Jesus does. Now, we don't know exactly what Jesus is writing here. There are a few speculations. I'll give those to you so you can think of what you think might be the most accurate in your mind here. It could be that Jesus doesn't really need to think about how to answer this question. He doesn't need to think about how to respond. These questions are so trivial to him, and to show that, he's simply doodling. He could be, could you imagine you walk in and the scene is tense and you're like firing all these questions and he's just drawing little stick figures? I think that would be funny to think about. Or maybe it's not that. Maybe he's doing other things. If we look at the original language, it actually suggests that maybe he's listing something. Maybe he's writing something down. He could be listing, maybe it's people in the circle. He could be listing different scriptures. Or he could be listing maybe different sins. That would be a little bit more interesting for me if he is sitting there. Could you imagine you're standing in this circle and all of a sudden a guy you've never met writes down your name and a sin that you have committed or something that you have done wrong, something that you thought was completely hidden, and imagine him writing that. But as we read this is what's going on, and he has his rebuttal, and he says this: "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." He's not discounting the law. That is what needs to happen. That's the law, that somebody needs to do this. But he knows that no one in that circle can throw a stone. Nobody can do anything because they are all full of sin. They're humans. The only person who would then be able to do that by that criteria would be Jesus. Jesus is effectively putting himself in between the stones and the woman, as he's the only one that can do that. I think that's an interesting way to think about it, that in reality, he set it up to where only he is able to do that, and we need to be thankful for that. He's effectively gotten out of this corner he's in, and the text continues and says this, verse 9, "At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until Jesus was left with the woman standing there. And Jesus straightened up and asked her, 'Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?' 'No, sir,' she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Can you imagine what this looks like? Can you picture it in your mind? You have Jesus, this brilliant rabbi, sitting there, and then there's this woman that's dragged out, forced to stand in front of everybody. She's standing there, and all these people are there. They are yelling, they are spitting, they are saying things, and they're questioning, and they're saying, "Jesus, what do we do? What do we do with this woman? I want to hear what your reaction is to this." And Jesus pauses, and he says, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her," as he's drawing in the ground. And you can almost feel the energy just dissipate. You can almost feel just it go quiet. All this anger, all this tension just breaks. And they all have these stones in their hand, and Jesus says that. And he said, and they stand there and they think for a second. And then one by one, they drop the stones and walk away, as Jesus is just with his head down, drawing and writing in the sand. It's a beautiful thing. And eventually they're all gone, and Jesus is almost sarcastic about this. And I think it's funny. It shows God's sense of humor. He's like, what happened? Is there anybody still here? Is there anybody that has condemned you? And the woman says, no, sir. And he says, well, neither do I condemn you. But I want you to pay very much attention to this last verse. He says, "Go now and leave your life of sin." He doesn't just dismiss it. He doesn't just offer tolerance. He offers forgiveness. "I forgive you for what you are done. Now go and act differently." The law of Moses, which is what's being challenged here, is not there to put others down, put others to shame. It's a tool to make people righteous, to make people leave sin. I like what he writes here. I think it's important. The law is supposed to shine a light of God's judgment in the dark places of the heart. The law is supposed to shine a light of God's judgment into the dark places of the heart. See, sin is a very evil and horrible thing, and it thrives in darkness. Once it takes root, it grows, it's spread, it's like a virus. But God's judgment is supposed to be a light, and this light is what will kill this sin. It's all about what's happening in the heart here. Jesus puts himself between the rocks and this woman. And in reality, all of those Pharisees could have been where that woman was standing. All of us could be where that woman was standing. And the only thing that's in between the stones and that person is Jesus. And I think that's important to think about when we look at this big topic that is judgment. I wonder how Jesus felt. I wonder how he felt sitting there. I wonder, as he's hearing these words, these names, the stigma brought up, everything that is being felt there. I wonder if he looked at the woman and what was he thinking about? His head is down. You know, when we think about Jesus, when we think about the way he grew up, when he was born, his mom was pregnant with him before she was married. I mean, I can't be for sure, but I would have to think that he probably got made fun of a little bit. But I would have to think that his mom was persecuted for this. I mean, everybody knew. The word traveled pretty quickly. And so I wonder when we think about the words that they're using, the way that they're describing this woman, the shame, the guilt, spitting, I mean, all the names and horrible things that are being said to this woman, I wonder if he's thinking back to growing up and hearing what they're talking about his mother, the one who cared and nurtured for him. I wonder if he's thinking about that. I think it's cool because in this central passage of the identity of who Christ is, one, we see his grace and truth and mercy here, but not only that, we see that Jesus has been through it. I think it's really cool to see a woman so lonely in this position, and Jesus may be able to relate to that a little bit. He then finishes and he says, "Go now and leave your life of sin." It really is poetic, and I hope that you can see the beauty in this passage as well as the beauty throughout the Bible as we continue in this chapter. If you skip down to verses 23 through 24, it says, "But he continued, 'You are from below, I am from above. You are of this world. I am not of this world. I told you that you would die in your sins. If you not believe that I am he, you will indeed die in your sins. We learn so much from Jesus here. See, in this passage, we learn Jesus is God. He is I am. He is the person who will take care of the judgment. He is the only person that will be between the stones and the woman, the stones and you and I. He is the only person. And what I want us to gather from this passage is this: when Christians seek to judge before they seek to save, Jesus gets mad. When Christians seek to judge before they seek to save, Jesus gets mad. Here we see Jesus' heart, and his heart is more concerned with saving this woman, with taking this woman who is in the dark and pulling her into the light. That is what he cares more about than the view of judgment that we have. See, I'm not saying Jesus isn't judging this woman, but I think a lot of times that word gets a little bit mixed up here. This is a bold claim, but I want us to think of, there's three thoughts that I would like this to connect with. When Christians seek to judge before they seek to save, Jesus gets mad. Let's look at these three things. The first thing, John 1:14, it says this. This is the beginning of the book that we're already in. It says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came to the Father, full of grace and full of truth." Anytime we talk about judgment, grace and truth need to be included because they're such big things, big topics that are involved in who Jesus is. I believe you can see that in this story, but I'd like to illustrate that for you. I want you to picture that you have a coworker who gets on your nerves a little bit. I trust that many of you have that. Maybe it's not a coworker, but a friend. This coworker in our situation here, they happen to be consistently late. Consistently, they're never on time. They show up, they're a wreck. They look like they've just been through a tornado. They're not reliable. They're hard to get along with. Maybe you know somebody who is like that, and maybe you're thinking the worst. These people are difficult to get along with. And so there in this company, there has been a dip in productivity because this has started to affect the workflow. And so the boss needs to do something about this. He needs to pull this person aside and have a conversation. Well, in this, there's probably a couple different ways you can go. If you put yourself in the boss's shoes and you're thinking, what is the response to this? You can say a couple of different things. Maybe the answer is, well, she's been late so often, so we need to punish here. We need to say, all right, well, there's gonna be consequences because you can't keep doing this. And so maybe it's we take some of your vacation time away. Your PTO goes away. Or maybe you need to work overtime a couple times to kind of make up for that. That might make sense. Maybe you have a more relaxed boss, and the boss is like, well, we're all late sometimes. Like I'm late sometimes, and they let it slide. And they're like, hey, try not to be late, but they let it slide. Those are two ways that you could handle the situation. But luckily, this boss is a good boss, and so they bring the coworker in, and the coworker comes in, sits down, and they're having a conversation one-on-one. The boss finds out, hey, this person is late, not because of any bad reasons. Regardless, they're still late. They're late because they are a single parent, and they have to get their kids to school. And when they get their kids to school, a lot of times they get stuck in traffic on their way back. That is the result. That is the reason they are frazzled. That is the reason there is a dip in productivity because they're late, and that's the reason. Well, the boss can now respond to this, and luckily our boss is a very, very good boss, a very gracious boss, a boss who is concerned with the truth. And the truth is we have to maintain production. We have to be able to produce at the level that we need to be producing at. You cannot still be late. You can't keep being late. So the boss says, here's what I will do. I want to offer up my resources. I have a person that drives me to work every day. I will let them drop me off at work, and then I will pay him a little bit extra so that he will drive to your house and pick up your kids and take them to school so that you can be at work on time. And when you get to work on time, then we will talk about a further solution. But I need you to get caught back up because that is what's important here, is that we are all caught back up and the company is functioning as it's supposed to. This is a very, very generous solution. Obviously, the coworker accepts this, and they move on, and they work together. When we look at an example like this, we see a couple different things. If we back out of it and we look at our relationship with God, God is 100% full of grace and 100% full of truth. That equation doesn't always make sense to us because it's like, how can those two things be happening at the same time? Often, truth is punishment. You've done something wrong. You aren't living up to what you need to. So the truth is we need to have some type of consequence for this action, some sort of punishment. And consequences will happen, and they happen naturally most of the time. In our example, yes, there's consequences. She is being judged and talked about. But in reality, the option for 100% truth is, well, you need to work overtime. You need to make this up. This is the issue here, and it's not being met. We're going to take away some vacation time until you can figure this out. Well, God is also 100% truth, or 100% grace. And when we think about grace, a lot of times we think of being soft, somebody just kind of letting something go, kind of a free, you're good, a free gift. And so it isn't just that either. The truth is these things don't just oppose each other, they work together. There's a dichotomy between grace and between truth. Our minds may gravitate to judging this person, the coworker who was late, but our boss is a good boss, and he offers 100% grace and 100% truth. The truth is we need to meet this deadline. We need to be at this level of production, and we cannot do that if you are consistently late. But in order to get you to this truth, I'm going to offer you grace. I'm going to give a generous gift of my resources to you to move you back to this position. And that is oftentimes what God does. That is what he has done. We are never going to be able to get back up to here on our own. He gives us a gift of grace that pulls us back to it. That gift is his resources in this, but we know what that gift is in relation to God, and that is Jesus. Grace is a beautiful, beautiful thing. If something is graceful, it's beautiful. You might know people named Grace. That's a beautiful name. When we look at the word grace, it's written all over the Bible. In the Psalms, it's used in a context that looks more of, if you have found favor in me, please help me. Please give me this gift, this generous gift. That is what that word grace is implying. So our God being 100% full of truth and 100% full of grace is very important. I've heard it described like this. Truth is the structure. So truth is like your bones. It's like your skeleton. It's what helps you stand up straight, walk around, do the things you're supposed to. Well, grace is the flesh. It's the beautiful package that it's packed in. If you just had a bunch of skeletons walking around, we might be scared, and it's gross and it's weird. If you just had grace lying around, then it would just be a pile of flesh that could not do anything. They don't have any purpose. They're just laying there. Both are essential. The Pharisees, in our example, are 100% truth. That might be why people are so scared of them, is because they look like skeletons. All the things that they are doing, they are only emphasizing the truth and not emphasizing grace at all. The truth is that truth and grace have a lot more in common than we may think. See, both are not fair. The truth oftentimes is not fair, and I trust that many of you probably know that. You've received bad news, diagnosis. Things have happened in your life that are true things that are not fair. Oftentimes, grace is not fair. In fact, I would say most times grace is not fair. It's undeserved. You are given grace for something that you should not have been given grace for. They are both not fair and undeserved. But when we look at these Pharisees in our example, they are offering 100% truth. They neglect grace. If we were to look at somebody who was 100% grace, we don't even see them because they probably wouldn't do anything about it. They have no structure, no truth to stick to. But we see Jesus in our story here. He is 100% grace and 100% truth. He offers to pull this person out of the darkness back into the light. When we are full of grace and truth, we look to save others rather than bringing judgment upon them. Now, I want to be very careful when we talk about this topic, because judgment is a scary topic, and using the word save is a scary thing. We cannot save anybody. I cannot save you. I can't save anybody either. Jesus is the only person able to do that. But in this story here, Jesus' heart is oriented to saving people. And that is where our hearts must be as well. Even though we don't have the action, we don't have the ability to pull somebody back up into the light, Jesus does. We can walk alongside them as they do that. I want to continue because there's a couple more thoughts that come with this. Grace and truth can be very, very difficult. But could you imagine what the world would look like if we had full grace and full truth? Could you imagine what the church would look like if in every interaction, every conflict, every time you got into an argument with a family member, with your student's teacher, with your neighbor, with the people that you bump into, if you had full grace and full truth in those interactions, could you imagine what would happen? I think this would solve a lot of the issues that we see in the church today. But I want to be clear and move to the second thought, and that comes from us. That comes from 1 Corinthians 5, 12 through 13b, or A, I should say. It says this: what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside. Judgment is a scary word. And a lot of times when we see it, when we think about it, judgment means to kind of sit back and point and say, you are doing this and that is wrong. You are doing this and you should stop doing this. That is bad. That is oftentimes what we view judgment as. Let me be clear. There is no reason to judge those outside of the church. Outside of Christianity, we look at another person. If we are to look at another person and say, this person, they are bad. They are a bad person for what they are doing. I can't believe they do stuff like that. Now, what they're doing might be bad, and the world is a very, very broken place, and we can be brokenhearted about that. And I can look at them and say, I hate that they are doing that. I wish they wouldn't do that. But to judge them as a person because of these decisions, there's no point in doing that. They are living by a different set of rules. They're living by a different code than we are. That doesn't make sense. It's like going up to somebody who only speaks Spanish and saying you're using your English pronouns wrong. Like your punctuation isn't correct in your English language when they're speaking a different language altogether. It doesn't necessarily make sense to judge those outside of the church. Now, again, I want to be clear. We need to be brokenhearted for them. We need to walk alongside them. Our heart should be to save them, not bring judgment down upon people who aren't even in the church in the first place. The appropriate response is to walk alongside. We see Jesus do this very often. I think a lot of times it's easy to kind of sit back and say, well, as I see this, I wouldn't want to go hang out with those people. I mean, you see the decisions that they're making. I wouldn't want my family to be near theirs. I wouldn't want to interact with those people. I think that's an easy thing to do. And while influence is real and we need to stay grounded in our faith, I don't think Jesus ever said things like that. It's interesting. I don't want us to miss that point, but I want us to continue on our third point as we wrap up here, as we're almost done. Matthew 18 tells us this, verse 15 through 17. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen to you, then you've won them over. If they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by a testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Well, this can seem confusing because we just learned that we're not supposed to judge those outside of the church. We're supposed to have grace and truth. What is the heart of all this? What does all of this mean? If I could explain like this, I grew up in a Christian middle school and high school. I went to a Christian college. One of the things that we would do is we would have a Bible class. In that Bible class, we would memorize Scripture. And so we would walk in and have a memory verse quiz, John 8, 1 through 5. Write it down. And that would be the quiz we would need to do. Now, for a lot of people, I just talked to somebody who graduated from private school as well. It seemed like a lot of people like to cheat in their Bible classes because it seemed easier. If my mom or dad ever found out that I cheated in a Bible class at all, really, I would have just gotten it. I would have gotten in unbelievable trouble. So I was, out of fear of them, I did not really cheat in my Bible classes. But honestly, it was like other people looked at me and was like, why aren't you just copying this verse down before you go into the classroom? Like I was looked at as the fool in that sense. And I honestly, there was a big temptation there. But let's, for this example, assume my whole Bible class was Christians within the church. I had friends who would come up and cheat, and when they would do it, I would kind of maybe I would sit up a little bit so that people couldn't see that they're cheating. Maybe I would not talk about it, sort of hide it, kind of give them the benefit there. And then if I had somebody who I didn't really like, if they came in and they were cheating, then I would honestly do the opposite. Did you see that he brought his phone in there and had it under the table? Or he wrote it he saw it. He wrote it on his knee. I saw it. I would sort of do that. Both were not appropriate responses to that. Assuming everybody in that is Christians, a more appropriate response is, hey, brother or sister in Christ, I love you and I want the best for you. Please stop cheating on your memory verse quizzes. Now, we need to be very careful with this because as we see problems throughout the church, humility is extremely important in this. This cannot be I am here, you are here. Let me pull you to my level. Because in reality, the way I explained this before is you can pull them into the light. You can walk alongside one. Jesus is the one who's doing the saving. But eventually, you are going to be the one that is down. You are going to be the one that is in the dark. And you're going to want them on your team to help pull you back into the light. Humility is important in this as well. When we look at judgment, we should seek to save before we seek to put other people down in our judgment. This is very, very important. Jesus' heart seeks to save in all of this. And with grace and with truth and with humility, if the church started to do this a lot better, I could see a lot of the problems that we have start to diminish. This is extremely important. We're called to live in the light, because when it comes to Christians, when we look at other Christians, other church goers, do judge them, but don't do it alone. Don't do it behind closed doors where I can sit back and point. I can't believe what they did. Like those people over there, I hope they get in trouble for that. I can't believe that. We need to be full of grace and full of truth. We'd be full of this humility to say, you know what? We're all going to mess up. We're all on the same team here. We need to work together because the unified church is one of the most powerful things in the world. And that's what we should be striving for as Christians. We need to have the heart to save our fellow Christians. We need to have the heart to save the world. And in all of that, grace and truth. Because when Christians seek to judge before they seek to save, Jesus gets mad. I think from our story earlier, we can clearly see his heart was to save this woman before it was to judge. And the issue with all of the rest is their hearts were so quick to judge. Sin can go so easily unnoticed. Maybe we see other Christians out and they do things that maybe they shouldn't be doing, and we kind of let that slide. We don't. If we are all on the same team, approaching a brother or sister in Christ and wanting the best for them, there's nothing wrong with that. Accountability is important. But judgment in a way of dragging people down, that is not what judgment is about. As N.T. Wright said earlier, judgment is about pulling people up into the light. So my prayer for you is this, is that our hearts are seeking to save others rather than they are to bring them down in judgment. That last command in our story is go and sin no longer. And I think a lot of times we may miss that. We may be missing the point in all of this. See, it isn't just tolerance. It isn't just let them go do whatever they want. It's forgiveness. It's bringing people into the light. Now, that's my prayer for you today. Allow me to pray for you. God, I pray that our hearts can be of you, that our hearts can be like your heart. God, I pray that we can seek to save But know that it's not us who can do any saving. It's you. I pray that we can walk alongside people as they're brought into the light to follow you and follow you more closely. God, we will make mistakes. We will fall back into the darkness. I pray that you can prepare our fellow believers to help us out of these holes that we're in. But in reality, God, we pray that you are the one to come and save us, and that we can accept that. God, we thank you for getting in between the stones and the woman, just as if we are that woman there. Thank you for protecting us and being the only person who can control that. God, we love you and praise you, and we thank you for this time. And it's in your name I pray. Amen.